So, you still want to make a medieval MMO. Hello, my lovelies. I'm Jenny O, the author with no last name, and I'm also a dev editor, fashion designer, and game dev. And you want to make a medieval themed MMO, despite my last video talking about how the medieval themed brand is essentially dead. You can't be talked out of it because you love the concept so much, and plate armor, castles, and dragons are dope. Not my word. Am I allowed to use that word? And you're pretty mad at me because you want to make RuneScape better, and you're different, and you aren't going to fail like Titan Reach did. If you wanted RuneScape better, Titan Reach was the game to fund, and the servers are closing or closed, so there's that. And now RuneLite HD is coming from RuneScape itself, so old game but better textures and graphics. Woohoo! That is, if Jagex hasn't destroyed trust with the player base. Maybe you think because Blizzard's declining player base in, well, all their games, and the players jumping to Final Fantasy XIV, now is the time for a 5-year development of a new medieval MMO. Even though Ashes of Creation is coming, Bless Unleashed, Black Desert Online, and Crowfall are still up. There's Mortal Online 2. Everyone is hyped for New World. League of Legends is working on an MMO to go with their MOBA. There's even Path of Exile. None of that matters to you. You love medieval MMORPGs and you want to work on one and you're passionate about it. Okay then, let's problem solve. Problem 1. Sandbox PvP MMOs are a small, niche audience. Solution. Create a story-driven theme park style MMO. Okay, the tough love starts right off the bat. PvP players are a very small audience. It depends on who you talk to, but anywhere from 5 to 30% of a player base is interested in the PvP endgame style content out of all MMORPGers. And with the rise of the MOBA and all its forms, it's really easy for a PvPer to go play a MOBA over an MMORPG, because unless you have a system like the original Guild Wars, where you can build a PvP character right off the bat, the MOBA allows them to jump into the PvP right away. So, I do recommend a Guild Wars system where you can let PvP players create a PvP-only character, and the rest of the player base can create the PvE characters and play through the PvE content that 70 to 95% of them want. 70% might actually be the single loner style players, so that's a problem to tackle later. And even Amazon's New World had to change from a sandbox PvP style MMO to a theme park MMO with some story on recommendations of the player base, meaning Amazon wanted to make money, saw sandbox PvP was turning a lot of players off, and changed their game design. Problem. Theme park styles MMOs have story. Solution. Have a writer or a group of writers on your team. So, if you're not doing a PvP sandbox MMO, you have to deal with a core game loop that involves story-based questing. This means you need a story with stakes and a conflict, and, well, a reason for the characters to be doing everything they're doing other than a quest marker told me to. Set your game mechanics list to the side for a minute and work out a germ of a story. RuneScape is an Arthurian story. World of Warcraft is a story about big conflicts between races, and I guess the demons and the Lish. Or the Lick. Whatever. I mean, it's kind of like the idea of the small wars going on in Europe between different little kingdoms. I can't even keep track of it anymore. In Guild Wars, you were a soldier working your way to gain reputation and be a hero starting in this conflict against the Char. Take even Game of Thrones, which is a retelling of the War of the Roses, where no one is going to get a happy ending because I guess George R.R. Martin is like that. Stories will have themes, and you're going to think about the bigger, overarching conflict and the smaller conflicts and side plots that draw the player character into your world. Is this a game about survival? Is it a game about war and the cost of war? Is it about who is the true monarch and what makes a monarch? The Weight of the Crown is written by Mercedes Lackey. Is it about stopping the corruption of industry like Lord of the Rings? Your mechanics needs to serve your theme of the story. This is your game core. What is your game about? What are the 3 most critical things about your game that can answer questions like what, how, and why? If games are about wish fulfillment, what wish is your game filling? If you love these medieval games, I'm assuming you've played a lot of them, and so it would behoove you to sit down and figure out what every medieval game has done or has in common story-wise, so you don't do that thing. And at the same time, you can figure out what you really loved about those stories, assuming you read the text, and you can try to adapt what you love and are passionate about to your story. And because there is a glut on the market, there are a lot of games, both MMOs and single-player action RPGs, for you to play and really research what works story-wise and what doesn't. If you want to tell a story in a certain genre, yes, it is part of your job to play or watch Let's Plays or read books in that genre. Tolkien, Lewis, Sapkowski, Sanderson, Rothfuss, Lackey, George R. R. Martin, Ron, Tad Williams, Barb Hendy, Glenn Cook, Jordan, Terry Brooks, and so on and so forth. Interactive storytelling is different than telling a book. Most of your IP started with books or role-playing games, so you need to read those books and learn the codes inside and out. Then you need to also research actual history those books are based on, so you know the difference between a trebuchet and ballista, an onager and a mangonel, etc. And while the Victorians have scrubbed off most of the plating off the plate armor, it's in museums to look at. They also scrubbed the paint off of Greek and Roman statues. However, I want to point out something relevant Nisha JT said on Twitter. Fantasy isn't historical fiction, even if it seems set in a time period you recognize. My characters can carry swords and ride horses and have electricity, running water, and flushing toilets. Get over it! It's fantasy! So, even if your game has a grounding in historical time periods, it doesn't mean your story and your technology is restricted to that time period because magic. It's fantasy. It's not necessarily historical. Break those walls. But all of this doesn't actually sidestep the fact there is still a glut on the market for those medieval MMO games. Problem: there's still a glut in the market. Solution 1. Change your market. Okay. The market for most combat medieval fantasy-style MMORPGs is the 18 to 25-year-old male. Even though female players make up 52% of the computer gaming market, like they make up 50% or so of the world, go figure, most of the big AAA games aren't being made with the female market in mind. Outside of mobile and browser games and a few horse games like Star Stable or Horse Club Adventures. This means there is a huge market gap for the female demographic from 12 to 18 to adult for a bigger style game that has features similar to a male demographic game. This isn't go woke, go broke. Look, Star Stable's making between $26 to $44 million on a less than 1 million player base. If they actually, worked on their game properly and gave their dev team the proper tools, they could be making twice as much with twice as many players. They've got less than 3% active player base out of their 21 million subscribers. It's very sad. And the solution is very simple. Add story. But no. If you want to make a medieval-style game and find a gap in the market, welcome to the female market. Pretty castles, pretty plate armor, pretty horses, pretty dragons. If I could have a medieval MMO where I could play a Dannery-style character raising pretty dragons without having to worry about combat, or people coming in stealing my dragons, maybe do flight races like How to Train Your Dragon or Spyro, or even Pokemon-style battle arenas, I would be all over that game. Flight Rising is a very popular game. Now take that into 3D and allow me to customize the character and have a castle and cool, pretty plate armor that looks like art from Nick's Zoo on ArtStation. I would be all over it. Add fantasy horses with fantasy medieval horse armor and lots of pretty dresses. Okay, I'm putting this on the list. There's a very large medieval RPG horse community on DeviantArt called Drakehest, where players can create their own medieval or Renaissance-style houses, and there's these special magical horses. And it's really hard to find the story buried across multiple pages, but it also involves having dragons and mostly centered around Norse culture, though in the roleplay, so you don't have to stick to it. Obviously, you can't just go and make a 3D MMORPG based on Drakehest. They do own that IP. I'm just using it as an example of how these RPGs do exist out there for people who love horses, both male and female. I mean, horse is still huge despite not having a 3D element. Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell had an MMORPG for a bit. It wasn't 3D, but it existed. Solution 2. Change your time period, architecture, and location. Welcome to France, or the Cotswold, or Germany, or Russia, or the Renaissance palace building versus castles. Black Desert Online is successful because instead of an enchanted forest, they used a desert, and a lot of Indian and Moroccan style in their game. They're also an Eastern company. It is perfectly acceptable in a fantasy world to start mixing styles. For instance, Kevin Gudsman, I'm sure I said that wrong, on DeviantArt has taken the mud and waddle style of Queen Bess's time, mixed it with the Victorian style arches, and made it rounder to create a more feminine style and is rather more Russian or Eastern European in flavor. He created an elven library where it was Cathedral Gothic meets the 80s. If you are making a fantasy world, real world architecture is just the first step. Remember, not historical fiction. It is inspiration, not something that needs to be copied joint for joint and block for block. You can take 50s architecture or Art Deco or Art Nouveau and mix it with something else like Renaissance palaces or medieval mud and waddle to create something unique, interesting, and new. A project I'm writing where the buildings are mostly made of glass. So large stained glass towers and houses that seem more like conservatories than what we consider houses, buildings with glass brick fronts and clear, and colors where the tops and the sides turn opaque or clouded for privacy, huge glass sculpture archways that look like elaborate sugarwork. It's fantasy, so there's a lot of magic involved, and yes, dragons. Please don't ask why I did this. My brain is not always logical or rational. Rip off the band-aid. Shove the box sides away. Take something mundane and make it beautiful. There are so many options and ideas, you don't have to stick to pure medieval mud and wattle style buildings, since those weren't the only medieval buildings. Think about the Turkish and Moorish influences in architecture, also of that time period. Think about how those ideas of architecture were recycled in later styles and how you can bring ancient or modern styles into a fantasy medieval setting. And for goodness sakes, abandon brown and gray. There's yellow limestone, red sandstone, black ironstone. There is pink marble, for goodness sakes. Please expand your color palette. Moving on. Problem. The sameness of character classes, NPCs, and enemies, and mechanics. Solution 1. Stop using humans. So there are a bunch of different viral art projects out there. The ones I tend to find out about and favor are the ones that usually end up kind of Redwall themed. What is Redwall? Well, Redwall is a series of books by Brian Jacques. Jacques is a British writer, and the books revolve around the origins of a mouse warrior called Martin and his legacy of his sword and who can carry his sword, which is constantly referred to as a tool, nothing magical, and who his father was and the happenings around Redwall Abbey, a red sandstone abbey community of forestland animal monks and their allies. So you have mice and otters and squirrels and moles and hares and the badgers, and they tend to go up against rats, cats, weasels, foxes, stoats, or even snakes, with the occasional bird enemy and allies like ravens, magpies, eagles, and owls. So there has been art for Redwall. In fact, every chapter had a small square of black and white etching style art. But they did more art for the smaller books about the different animals and watercolors for the cookbook, as well as artists taking animals like corgis and other dogs and cat breeds and drawing them as D&D classes. Or you can go all the way and make them dog tars and cat tars. There was a rumor about that project getting a game, but I don't know if anything came of it. Think about Crowfall's centaurs. It's different. It's exciting. Maybe there should be a game that's about centaurs. I don't know. Or you can do something like Dinotopia. Humans living side by side with dinosaurs that talk. Or, once again, may I make mention of Mercedes Lackey-style griffins, lizard people, and bird people. The Tavari, I think? The Tavari are very similar to sirens. The bird sirens, not the we conflated them with mermaid sirens. Think about the success of Veggie Tales. Look, in no sane world should have vegetables with Christian messages aimed at 4-year-olds taken off into a viral phenomenon for college students. But here we are. And there is My Little Pony, which has had so many renaissances it's getting ridiculous. Or maybe like Core Punk, you want to do a cyberpunk medieval setting. I've seen some great looking Eastern MMOs with cyberpunk style dragons. You don't have to have human characters for people to relate to them or want to play your game. Humans are weird. We can relate to Roomba robots. If you want to make a game where we can play warrior mice or archer squirrels or pirate-like otters, I am down. Yes, that is literally Redwall in a nutshell. Do I need to tell you about the shrews with short daggers and logboots? Or the berserker mole with a hammer? The badger lords have plate armor and hare armies with pikes? Solution 2. Toss out the Holy Trinity and come up with new classes and new magic systems. So you want to stick with humans. An animal D&D style game doesn't appeal to you. I don't know why there has to be only one Spyro, but fine. Humans it is. Yeah, this is going to take more work. If you put in a holy trinity of tank, glass mage, and healer with a few extras like ranger or berserker for spice, I have absolutely no reason to play your game. At least if those are the very same labels and looks you give to your classes. If you use the classical Greek 4-elemental magic system, then we've seen it. People are going to want classes that do big damage. They'll want classes that can sling particle effects. They'll want classes that can heal. But how are you going to package this to subvert the expectations of the players and still give them what they want? People want to see new things. In some cases, your character classes are going to depend on your world building. The religion. Who are the gods and goddesses of your world? Do they sponsor different character classes or professions? Maybe there is a way to change the way things work so the tank isn't actually the class with the biggest muscles and armor. Maybe the big muscles and armor are the wizards because they need the protection and it takes a lot of power to manipulate magic. Maybe your berserker class is actually very thin and wiry because they have to be able to move quickly. For instance, in Final Fantasy X-2, in the berserker class dress sphere, they had Riku using capoeira moves. The other two didn't make any sense. Is your ranger actually an archer? Maybe instead they use a slingshot or throw short spears. Remember, the ranger archetype is really based off the English longbowmen and the French versions of the tales of Robin Hood. Those dastardly Frenchmen. Maybe the ranger instead is a Greek or Roman Amazonian type, instead of your warrior type being dressed in Roman armor. Maybe your healers actually look like the wizards and witches rather than monks or priests. They carried long staves in order to touch and move about the plague-ridden and dead so they wouldn't become infected themselves. New World went with plague doctors, which is a neat, almost kind of viral thing. Plague doctors as imagery have been slowly seeping into popular culture. And you also need to think about your enemies. Zombies, walking skeletons, spiders, and so on and so forth are really overdone. You don't even really think about the messages anymore in fantasy enemies when humans fight animalistic intelligent beings, or the corrupted undead and dead. It's an ugly truth of our Western civilization. The quickest way to set two people against each other was to call them animals and barbarians. The Irish, and to an extent the Scots, were accused of being werewolves by the English for a reason. They were also accused of having no souls. The best way to make someone an enemy is to dehumanize them. And I understand this is one of those considerations that often gets overlooked, but please think of the people who want to play awesome medieval games and are phobic to spiders and snakes. I'm not talking squicked or creeped out. I'm talking actually phobic, as in they just can't play your game if there are sudden spiders or snakes in it. Please either don't include them, the top two fears in the world, or find a way to make it optional or change out the assets to something else so people who want to play these medieval MMOs don't have to be thrown into a panic attack. And if you just went, my game isn't for those type of people, please go learn some empathy, then make a video game after you've worked on yourself. Like I said, this is going to be more work. I saw a really cool idea for, instead of elemental magic, color thingy magic, and the better and more pleasing your color combination, the more damage you do. Or think of the Bard's Tale, where magic was related to music he played on his lute, much like the Pied Piper enchanted the rats with his flute. Or maybe you're going to throw out the class system entirely and come up with a skill tree system so players can create any type of character they want and aren't locked into a profession. Or maybe it's time to figure out how to make a Magitech medieval game, or a cyberpunk medieval game, or go full Star Wars style and create a medieval sci-fi game, or create a singular style out of 3 different cultures. I have a game idea where I want to mix the fashion of ancient Egypt with Scotland and Roman legionaries. I have no idea yet if this is going to work. It's just sitting there, simmering in my brain. Now we can get into game mechanics. Your game mechanics are going to depend heavily on your story and your market. Harsh truth again. Tap target and action combat MMOs are out there. They're done. Wizard 101 had an interesting card combat system like Magic the Gathering. If you want to do a combat-oriented MMO, you are going in an uphill battle against much bigger games from bigger studios with huge budgets and a very demanding and fussy market who will rip your game to shreds if the combat is boring or not distinct enough between classes. You may not want to make a competitive combat MMORPG and work something out that's a cooperative style MMORPG where people get points for helping each other instead of killing things. How do you balance it between the loner players and the group players without forcing social interaction? No one likes being forced to interact with people on their fun time. Combat or no combat, dungeons or no dungeons, raids or no raids, big battle arenas or no battle arenas. The more people you put on a screen, the more work the game has to do to be fast. And if your game has low FPS and lags, you can bet they're going to nail you on it. How do you make your game challenging and also fun without it being kill this many monsters in return? Over and over and over again. What does the MMORPG game of the future in 5 years actually look like? Designing an MMO based on the MMOs of today with the mechanics they have right now will make the genre stagnant. What type of mechanics from other game genres and even new game mechanics for a big style game can be developed using the latest technology and engines? Yes, you're going to want to get the latest engine you can design your MMO in. Ashes of Creation is using Unreal Engine 4 because it was the latest engine they could get their hands on when they started developing. In April of 2022, Epic is putting out Unreal 5, and I expect many games of the future will be using Unreal 5. The older your game engine is, the more out of date your game is going to be when it launches. And as an indie, building an engine from scratch is most likely not economically feasible. You've got a few choices, and each of them is going to require building some extra code, but it's better than building an engine from scratch. Epic and Unity are putting out engines for you to use for a reason. Don't let others discourage you from using them. Maybe you like Guild Wars 2 jump puzzles and the way their mount system works. Maybe you think the way of the future is adding more platformer style mechanics into MMORPG games. Maybe MMORPG games need more puzzle type aspects from old RPGs where you had to solve and collect items to open doors and chests in order to progress in the game. Maybe you like core punk and miss the top-down aspect of real-time strategy war games and want to make your MMO like Warcraft or Dota 2. Maybe you love Shadow of the Colossus and want to see huge bosses like that in your MMORPG. Surely you play more than one style of game. So I just want to point out Tiny Tina's Wonderlands here as a D&D style game gone wild. It's everything Dreamworld I think wants to be and just fails. Wonderland takes the medieval idea and cranks it up to 11. They know the game is ridiculous, and they're banking on the game being ridiculous and over the top and almost a parody of the genre. It's kind of like Psychonauts. It is so out there and so crazy, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And that's kind of the state of the genre right now. You have to push the boundaries in such a way you are self-aware you're doing it, and the whole player base who might want to play your game is aware you're doing it, and everyone is okay with it. Or they hate it. Go big! Go awesome in your concept, or well, you're going to just blend in with everyone else. So if your market is too small or niche, you need to change your market by changing the game style or the gender target of your game. Add a story. Story is the content. To keep your game from looking like all other games, you can change up how the player character looks by abandoning humans and going with fantasy or animal races, or you can change up your class system, or abandon the class system entirely, and blend your medieval MMO with other genres, or change the time period and location, and blend your architecture with other styles. Same for clothes. You are not restricted to just England, 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 with mud and rattle buildings and the color brown. Mix things up! When you design your game, think about the game of the future, not the game of today. What do you wish to see in a future MMO, and design your game to fulfill that wish. Go big. Go bold. Have fun with it. Don't take yourself so seriously. There is a time to be serious. Be serious in being creative and doing the work of making your game. When it comes to making ideas, world building, and storytelling, have fun with it. If you want to make a medieval game about cat girls who can cast magic, well, you know what? That sounds fun. Do it. Don't worry about cringe culture or what other people will think. Throw ideas out there and see what sticks. If you aren't having fun when you're coming up with ideas for your game, people are going to notice. Maybe this gave you some ideas. Maybe it didn't. There are a lot of ways to take a base idea and make it exciting if you're willing to push the boundaries of your imagination and work your way out of the problem. Take care of yourselves, bless, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.